Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Bog Panda. And tonight we're going to talk about a really serious topic, the 3DO. I am Dr. Mike at Official Pagan on everything, and joining me as always.
Hi, everybody. This is Kelly at KELLYTHUL on Twitter and Instagram. And all that information I just provided you was true, just so you know. Um, in addition to that, we'd really appreciate it if you consider subscribing to the Bog Panda YouTube channel. Check out some of our videos. Give the ones that you like a like. We'd appreciate it. It helps us out with the evil algorithm and all that good stuff. We really would appreciate that. And while you're on the Bog Panda YouTube channel, be sure and check out our merchandise and the world's shortest podcast, Hard No. It's a playlist, it's a Google podcast. It is no episodes over a minute long. So it's not a big investment, and I think you'll like it.
You'll love it. But tonight we're here to talk about 3DO. So recently, Kelly and I did an episode where we talked about our kind of impressions of what we had seen and what we had heard about Doom on the 3DO. And I didn't have a physical 3DO. I know the 3DO emulation can be tricky sometimes. There are 3DO games that are included on a couple versions of Super Console X, the higher end versions of that. But from the reviews that I've seen, the games don't play back great from what people are saying, usually missing music and things like that, which ironically is one of the things 3DO is known for, is the soundtracks to the games. So looking around, I discovered 4DO, which is a emulator, and a extremely helpful person put up videos which included links, a good link for 4DO, a good link for the BIOS that you need to add so that it can read the disk images, and helpfully the Internet Archive, someone put disk images for what looks to be just about every 3DO disk. Not only games, but like interactive movie stuff that was released on there, sampler discs that were released for it, magazine discs and things like that. So it seems like if it's not complete, it's got to be a near complete collection of everything, including different region versions of games. So incredibly helpful. So I was able to put all that together. Getting 4DO set up took maybe 5 minutes to get everything set up on there. And then naturally, first thing I did was grab that disk image of Doom and open it up to see if it was everything that was promised to us. Now, I think I should preface this by saying again, I've never had a 3DO. I don't know a lot of people who had 3DOs. I remember playing it once at someone's house, and the game that I played was Way of the Warrior, which is kind of an infamously bad game. You'll find a lot of videos about it. It's bad. It's a bad game. Soundtrack's great, which is something that I'm finding. I burned through maybe 10 or 12 games just playing a couple levels of each just to kind of get a feel for the system. And I specifically focused on games that are kind of universally looked at as the best and worst that the system had to offer, just so I can get kind of a good sampling of what 3DO is. It's very interesting. I think first, and once Kelly gets up and running with it, we have to do a deep dive in Doom,
Yeah.
but Doom is basically unplayable. It's my hot take on there, which isn't a very hot take because that seems to be everybody's. But it sounds great. The soundtrack really is excellent. The songs are reminiscent of the songs for each level, but they didn't stick to. And so for anyone who doesn't know, the music in Doom is chiptune music, but they ripped it off from famous songs. I'm not sure how they weren't sued, especially after Doom became such a big thing, but it's a big part of the reason that a lot of later versions of Doom don't have that soundtrack. They were replaced with custom soundtracks. Because I mean, when I say that they're big songs, it's bands like Slayer and Pantera, bands that were playing in stadiums. So this is not like, small bands that they were ripping off. So there are the way that the tracks appear on this, there are sort of minor resemblances to each so that you can recognize the song, but I would say 80% of the music is original, and it works really well though because it gives you the feel of each level of the music for it, but with kind of unique music. So I really did appreciate that element of it. um, if you've never played any of the console ports of 3DO or of Doom, I can't imagine that you would get through the 3DO version, not without tons of trial and error. So all console ports of Doom are based off of the Jaguar version of the game. And that's really important because id Software decided Jaguar, they were the only ones who I guess liked the Jaguar architecture and decided that that's how games would be made for consoles ports of their games. And that started with Wolfenstein 3D. And that's important because Wolfenstein 3D is one of those games that's universally seen as the best of the best for 3DO. So they made to see if they could port Doom to consoles. They first did a version of Wolfenstein 3D. So Wolfenstein 3D is the game that's usually credited with popularizing first-person shooters in the 90s. It is the third game in the series, get it, 3D, just like how movies used to do that. It's the third game in the series. The first two games look absolutely nothing like that. The game was extremely popular. They ended up releasing, again, it was released in episodes, similar to the way Doom was. Ultimately, there were 6 episodes released. So they came up with sort of a truncated campaign that remixed levels. And for the Jaguar, they made a 30 level game. Now, Doom is a much less graphically intensive game. The floor and ceilings have no textures, and the characters and the walls and things like that are much more simplistic than what you see in Doom. It's a very rudimentary game comparatively. So it's not a surprise that it could run one and not the other, but I'll keep going down that rabbit hole a little bit. So they made this Jaguar version. The Jaguar version of Wolfenstein 3D was meant as a demo to see if they could port Doom to it. So starting with Wolfenstein 3D, every version, console version of Wolfenstein 3D, except Game Boy Advance for some reason, is the Jaguar version of the game. So just like with Doom, they took the Jaguar version that they made because that became the official console layout of the game. And that's what it is. So if you're trying to play Doom on this and you've never played it on another console, it runs so poorly that I don't know that you would get through it unless you're really familiar with the other console ports, because the levels are slightly altered to, in their minds, work better on. I'm not a programmer, but to work better on a console. So those alterations are in this. So if you know where everything is, you can kind of get through it just by memory, but not actually playing the game. Like I was able to get through the first couple levels in the time that I spent with it just because I know where the enemies are and where everything is in the Jaguar version of the game, because that's also the 32X version, which I spent quite a lot of time with. So I was able to get through it just because of that. But the game is so choppy. There's so much lag in it. I couldn't like do anything, like unlock any of the secrets or do anything impressive with it. Just get through the first few levels. Wolfenstein is one of the games, though, where Doom is seen as one of the worst. And we covered that. You guys should go and watch our video. Doom was made by one person who had weeks to get it together. And id Software flat out thought it couldn't work on 3DO, which is why they made the licensing fee for it extremely high, hoping just nobody would license it. And I guess that was a diplomatic way of not coming out and saying they thought that the hardware wasn't up to par with it as some of the other consoles. Not only does, so as bad as it does prove it can technically run it. And with more than a few weeks to make it, I'm sure it would have been a much more playable version of the game. Wolfenstein 3D, though, is the best version of the game that I have ever seen. So the Jaguar version and all of the ports of it, because the Jaguar version became the official console one, is a 30 level campaign, and they redesigned everything for it. I'm not sure why, because it makes sense on the Jaguar because the Jaguar was a more powerful system. But then they tried to port those versions of everything to stuff like Super Nintendo, which really couldn't handle it. So I'm not sure why they slavishly stuck to those specific designs, but they did. So you get that 30 episode campaign from the Jaguar version, which also includes 2 new weapons, which is interesting. But the 3DO version also includes all 6 episodes of the PC version of the game. So you get 90 episodes or 90 levels, I'm sorry, spread across 7 episodes. So it's the largest version of
Hmm.
Wolfenstein 3D. And even though it is much more simplistic and rudimentary looking than Doom is, with that much content, it is hard to believe they couldn't have made Doom work. When you have 90 levels, like there's just so much content in there, and all the music is redone with live orchestration. So again, amazing redone soundtrack, which is a theme that you'll see with 3DO. So with all of that content on there, and there's no slowdown whatsoever. So all of the extra stuff, 90 levels. I can't believe Doom couldn't have worked on 3DO.
Yeah, that is super weird because it seems to me if you get Wolfenstein to come out actually as a pretty amazing version, the the gameplay. I mean, there's more textures to your point earlier. There's more textures to deal with in Doom, but that's like a processing power. That's not a coding thing. That's a processing power, which is something the 3DO had. So it's interesting that they struggled so much. Now I think part of it is they could have maybe replicated some of the Wolfenstein stuff if they had a little more time and maybe a chance to look at it, but that didn't happen. But you had to really bring the screen size down really really small to make it playable at all, right?
Yeah, to the smallest. So you actually can't go full screen without a code, but you can get pretty close to where there's just a border around it, and it is single digit frame rate. It looks like a slideshow. It's so choppy, and there's such a delay because of that. There's a delay in firing and response on things. So it's basically unplayable that way. So you have to shrink it all the way down to get it to run kind of smoothish. And at that point I was able to get through, but it's so small you can't see anything. So that's where I was saying, with being familiar with the Jaguar slash all console versions of it, I knew the layout of the levels. So I was able to get through the first couple levels, but not well. Like it wasn't fun to get through those levels, other than the music was great. Other than that, it really wasn't. So I am curious. I think we should both try and play through as much of it as we can and give a real review, because it was only the first couple levels. I doubt it's getting better from that point
I
on.
wouldn't think so.
But I don't understand, and I would love to. I'm sure there's something out there about it. I don't understand why id Software thought it was impossible when Wolfenstein 3D is by far the best version of it. And again, it's a more simplistic game, but it's gigantic on 3DO, 90 levels with a full orchestrated soundtrack. So again, even with the extra textures and stuff, you're talking about a much smaller game
Yeah.
in terms of physical size with Doom. So I can't imagine you couldn't do it if they really put the time into it.
Now I'm not familiar with this because I've never played a 3DO. Never had a chance to play on that console to have a comment about it. But so I'm not familiar with what their controller looked like. But so I'm assuming you're playing as just kind of using a Xbox 360, Xbox One
Yeah,
kind of
you can use an
controller.
Xbox controller. I was actually using the 8-bit Do controller, only because of the way the buttons are lined up. So 3DO has 3 buttons and then 2 shoulder buttons. So because of the way the buttons are lined up with these three, it makes it a comfortable equivalent of that. Now that does cause in one game a bit of an issue. So another one of their games that are considered, one of the best versions of the game, and I again agree, is they have a version of Super Street Fighter 2 for 3DO that at the time almost nobody played because it came out later in the system's life. And by system's life, I mean the like 2 years that it was on the market. But it's basically the whole game minus a little bit of animation, and particularly the parallax scrolling in the background. But other than that, there's no real load times, and the console version had load times on certain things, like the cartridge version. So there's no
Hmm.
real load times or slowdown. Everything moves super fast. All of the animation seems to be in there, other than some background stuff, and it has a custom soundtrack with live orchestration. Sounds incredible. Easily the best sounding version of Street Fighter 2. that's a little bit harder to play because Street Fighter 2 is a 6-button game. So it uses the start button and shoulder buttons as punch buttons. That's not comfortable to play.
No, I wouldn't think so.
Um, Capcom apparently made a custom controller for 3DO when this was released just for this game. So this really pointed out the two big things that I, now having played 3DO, would 100% attribute to the failure of 3DO from a consumer perspective. 3DO was very expensive. When it released, it was $700 for the system. That was in 1993 money. So that's like $1,500 now that it would have released for. People were mad that like the new PlayStation and Xbox were $600, not even half the equivalent of what this cost. So hugely expensive. And it was a 32-bit system. So it was in line with things like PlayStation and Saturn, which didn't cost that much money. We're coming in at less than half of what this cost. The reason that it costs so much is because the idea behind 3DO and why it seemed so cutting edge and exciting at the time was that 3DO didn't make the systems themselves. So the reason, the way that Nintendo and Sega made money is they manufactured the systems. They took a loss on the system. And this is the way this is what Xbox and PlayStation, this is how it works typically. They manufacture the systems and they take a loss on every system they sell. They make that money back by taking a cut of every game that's sold on there. So if you want to make a game for the system, you have to pay them. And those cuts, especially for Super Nintendo, is pretty infamous, can be pretty big. They can take a pretty big bite out of a game. So what 3DO decided to do was they weren't going to make the games and instead they weren't going to make the systems. They were going to publish the games and have extremely small licensing fees. So this made game companies excited to work with them, but the manufacturing companies weren't going to take a loss because they weren't making games. So the system cost $700 when it came out. And that's a big part of it. And to use Street Fighter as an example, then you had to buy a separate controller that only was for this game, which was like $40 or $50 or something like that, just for this game. So if you think about it now, you're the $700 for the system, the 50 or $60 for the game, and then another $50 for the controller that you basically need to play the game comfortably. So you're the equivalent today of like $1,500-$1,600 to play Street Fighter 2. So that's a non-starter for most people. And that's the biggest problem right there. So it really Street Fighter 2, more so than Doom, encompasses the biggest problems with the system. The other part of it is all of the games that people say are amazing for it really are, at least the ones that I've tried. Wolfenstein 3D, Road Rash, Street Fighter 2. That's the other problem with them, though. These are games that are ports. They're the best ports because they're taking all of the great stuff from all the other ports and putting them all into one, super greatest hits version of every game, which is great. But people already own those games. So your best games are not originals that are people have to go out and buy a 3DO to play. They're ports of games that people already have, or at least have already played. And especially something like Wolfenstein 3D, that game was years old by this point where it debuted on the system. So millions of people already had that game. Even if it is the greatest version of that game, are they going to go drop $1,200 on a system to play it? So you're essentially asking people to put in $1,000 plus price tags to play games that they already had, way better versions of them. But I can see where that's a difficult sell. It's similar to like when 32X, Mortal Kombat 2 for 32X is the best console version of Mortal Kombat 2. There are people who will argue with that, but they're wrong. It is just objectively better. But it came out like 6 months after the Sega version that people already paid $50 for. And then the 32X version came out, which is, again, overhauled in every way and better. But then it costs $70 on top of that. And this is early 90s money. So you're asking people essentially to pay $200 for this game today. It's a lot. So I think that those are really the contributing factors in why this system failed. Its best games are just really good ports of games you already have. And it cost a lot of money to play those games.
Cool. Well, and we'll be sure. So Mike made a lot of progress on this quick. Had a chance to do some experience. He sent me all the information. I haven't gotten the time yet to get going on it. So we'll I'll try and do that soon so that we can kind of do the deeper dives together. But we'll include links to some of the key locations you need to go to kind of get up and running. And it sounds like this video that for 4DO setup is pretty comprehensive and straightforward to follow.
Very simple and straightforward. They literally just give you the links. You go here, get the emulator, go here, get the BIOS, extract this file, put it here. You're up and running. Then you can head over to Internet Archive. Again, they have it looks to me, almost a complete set of disk images for 3DO. It's definitely worth playing. The good games really are excellent. But again, going back to, I can completely see why this failed. It was super expensive, and the best games are games you did already have, probably, even if they are better versions of them.
Yeah, it hadn't really occurred to me before, but I think that is, I think all the points you made are incredibly valid and why it went through. But I think the one that really rings true, that for long-term sustainability, to not have a either platform only specific option or at least a platform introduced version of some new game isn't gonna, that's the thing that's gonna, people, I got to get a 3DO because I want to play this X that
Right.
everybody's talking about, that nobody's played before, and they say it's awesome. That's the only way you're going to pull people in. So especially when there are a lot of other options out there that are cheaper and maybe not quite as good on some things, but how much are you willing to pay for enhanced experiences on games you've already played, to Mike's point?
Right. And again, I see both sides of it because I'm a huge defender of 32X Mortal Kombat 2, but I didn't buy it already for $50 and then buy it again for $70 6 months later. I waited for the 32X version. So I can totally see trying to pitch somebody a 32X or a 3DO version of Wolfenstein 3D, a game they've already had for years at that point. I mean, like, well, it's way better. Just buy this $700 system and then buy this game, and then, just put $1,500 down in early 90s money, and you'll be playing a better version of the game you already have. I can see where that's a really uphill battle of a sales pitch.
Yep, it obviously was, because ain't no 3DO anymore. So cool. Well, actually, one great find. So I'm glad and thanks for sharing. I'm looking forward to giving that a go round, and I have to figure out some ways on, once I get the emulator up and running, get the laptop over connected to the projector and experience the enhanced Wolfenstein in IMAX.
That's my next goal with it, is to get that on the projector. Because again, Wolfenstein, it's the best version of the game that I've seen or played.
Cool. Excellent. So anything else for this one, Mike?
The only thing I would let people know and let Kelly know is there's also a fair amount of After Dark ready material on 3DO.
Oh.
They were not fans of censorship on 3DO. So they made a deal with Vivid, the adult film company, to make interactive movies, which are essentially just like short films where you can jump around to different points in it, like a DVD, but on a CD-ROM. So there is After Dark material coming from our 3DO finds here.
After Dark 3DO edition. So something to look forward to, folks. Well, good. Yeah, we'll need to get one of those episodes out sometime soon. So yeah, so it sounds like I need to get on the stick here and get it up and going, and we'll check it out.
Bog Panda.